Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Vicenza. Allow me to first of all congratulate Vicenza for their 70th anniversary, but also I think a warm-hearted thank you to the organization of Vicenza and Cibjo for actually taking the topics of sustainability and responsibility in the jewelry industry at heart. I think it's one of the trade fairs that has always, avant la lettre, pushed the agenda of sustainability, so very grateful to be here. And today, I think it was really interesting, the panel before that we just had was really about innovation and sustainability. But actually, if we look at responsibility, we need to look at many different topics. And one topic that is very close to my heart is gender, equality for all. And this is a topic that we're going to talk about today. And allow me to introduce the panelists, and I'll start from my left side. Emilie van Landeghem, Manager, Governance and Strategic Sustainability Projects of the W&JI Initiative 2030. Lisa Königsberg, President of Initiatives in Art and Culture. We have Alice Vani, CSR Manager of Ital Preziosi. And I'm very happy also to have Mihwa Park with us, who is from UN Women and the Women Empowerment Principles Coordinator. Now, for those of you that are here that do not know what the W&JI Initiative 2030 is about, allow me to just give you a very quick update. So actually, we were founded by Kering and Cartier, an unusual partnership focusing on measurable impact in 3 key pillars: climate resilience, biodiversity and nature, and inclusiveness. And in the 3rd pillar, inclusiveness, of course, this topic fits perfectly in, because within inclusiveness, we look at operationalization of human rights, artisanal scale mining engagement, intersectionality between women's rights, human rights, climate, biodiversity, and then we want to be the ambassador of the Women Empowerment Principles. Now, we also had a very special guest from our board, Dr. Anino Emuwa, from 100 Women of Davos. But actually, from Davos, her flight got cancelled, and she's somewhere in getting out of security, hopefully. We might be able to dial her in, so I'm sorry. And she apologized for the inconvenience caused. But let's look at gender and diversity, because we're not on a good track. And if you look at our industry, we're definitely not on a good track. And if you saw maybe one of the posts that was done a week ago on looking at the luxury industry, men lead the luxury industry. 72% of CEOs are men. Only 5% of top luxury CEOs are people of color. We see when we look at women and men that more female CEOs present in perfume and cosmetics, but in watches and jewelry, only 17%. So I think it's time to move the needle. And then there's the business case, because if you look at McKinsey, if you look at the Boston Consulting Group, what are some of the numbers, diversity in numbers? 60% of teams with inclusive leadership perform better than average. 87% of employees with inclusive managers are less likely to leave. And so I think it's quite clear that the business case is there. So let me first of all start with you, Mihwa, because sometimes companies say, I don't know how to start this gender journey. Really, how do I start? And then there are the fabulous, I call it the UN Women Empowerment Principles. So Mihwa, can you talk us a little bit through, what do these principles mean? How can they contribute to business, and how can they help? Yeah.
No. Of course, nice to see you again, Iris, and you have been really true, let's say, ambassador of the WEPs, and we are really grateful. So I represent the Women's Empowerment Principle from UN Women. I see some familiar faces from last year, so you may be familiar. For those who are not familiar, it is a set of 7 principles that guide companies to advance gender equality and women's empowerment, and advance women's empowerment in the workplace, marketplace, and community. So as Iris was saying, a lot of companies these days are paying more attention to sustainability, responsible conduct, and etc. However, they often do not know where to start. That's where we come in with 7 principles to guide you to advance on workplace, marketplace, and community. So our principles can be a roadmap for companies to follow without you needing to create or reinventing the wheel, let's say. So what we help you is to advance gender equality in the workplace, of course. That is for your companies to look inside. You need to get this CEO's commitment or the highest decision makers' commitment or buy-in to take gender equality seriously and make it a priority in your company's day-to-day business. Then we look into advancing gender equality by removing all the practices and policies that's related to discrimination and inequality for women and men, and treating everyone equal that aligns with human rights. And then, of course, employers' safety and health and well-being, so you take care of them. And it was mentioned during the last panel, education. The education about it's on educating women so that they can move on to different sectors within your company, but also educating men about gender equality because they often don't know. And I was super excited to see more men in the previous panel, but we see some men, so they can learn about gender equality, and it matters, right? And then moving on to marketplace, we want companies to do more. A lot of companies are starting in their workplace and they're already doing a great job by implementing policies and practices that are related to treating their employees better inside. But outside in the marketplace, there's a lot more to do. And I can talk a little bit about gender responsive procurement that we have been focusing on starting, I think, a couple of years ago. And last year, we did a pilot program with members of Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030, which I believe Emilie will talk about a little more. Just a little bit more on the procurement market. As you know, global procurement market, it's worth trillions of dollars, and it involves both small and medium and big companies. However, due to systematic inequalities and discrimination, women are disproportionately represented in the supply chain. Normally, women make up at the lowest tier of supply chain. Often they're in the low-paying jobs and low income, low skill, and also operating in small scales. And if you're in your jewelry industry, you'll know most of the small mining or artisanal miners are women. And as Iris was saying, you don't have a lot of women in the management, so you do have a lot to go for. And that's where gender responsive procurement come in. So I was tuning into the previous panel to see if they have any gender lens. So gender responsive panel refers to sustainable selection of goods and services or civil work that thinks about the impact on gender equality. So we're not talking about only sourcing from women-owned businesses, which would be impossible, but we talk to you to leverage your purchasing powers and policies to really support these companies who are members of the WEPs, members of W&JI 2030, who are actually taking gender equality seriously, so that we can move the needle and we can change the industry. So we are here at UN Women to help you with the WEPs, and I'll be here if you have any questions later.
Thank you, Mihwa. And I just received a message from Anino, so I think I need some technical support. She could log in now. If someone could help me, please. I think while we're trying to bring her in, I might just reflect on that. So what we see today is, with our members is that we now have 2/3 of our members that signed the Women Empowerment Principles, and they're on a journey. So Anino, we see you. I don't know if you hear us. Wait. I think...
Hello, I hear you. Do you hear me?
Anino, we hear you perfectly well. So first of all, Dr. Anino Emuwa, founding woman of 100 Women of Davos. We're very proud to have her as our board member. She's pushing the boundaries of our initiative. And Anino, the fact that you are just landed from your flight, that you're in the car, and yet you still want to talk to us, I think it shows real commitment. Anino, we would love you to kind of set the scene on what you believe is so important in this D&I strategy for companies, and then also looking at it from a gender lens. Just kind of give your reflections. You've been now working with the initiative for almost a year, and I will later talk a little bit about the results of some of our work, but we would just love to have a little bit of your big thoughts. Thank you again for being so flexible.
Well, first of all, thank you, Iris, for having me here, and thank you to everybody. My sincere apologies. I'm actually on the way from Davos, and here I am in the car due to a delayed flight, but I hope you can hear us. Now, I think that what we need to take notice of most is we have gone beyond the stage of wondering whether D&I is the right thing to do. There's also a tendency to think of D&I as simply a matter of human rights. Of course it is. But for organizations around the world, it is actually about performance. It's about getting the best talent. And I think this is critically important, and we shouldn't lose sight of it. And the question is, why is this important? Simply because if we have all the talent in the world, we need to use it. And that means tapping into the talent from wherever it exists. And surely half the world's population has half the talent in the world. So that's the first thing. I think that also what we are seeing, sadly, is a kind of backlash on D&I. But that is not surprising, because when you do have vested interests, right, there's a likelihood that you will have that kind of backlash. But that shouldn't deter us from our purposes, because organizations and research are seeing that actually it's beneficial. So if we look, for example, at the World Economic Forum's report, the Lighthouse report, which came out, I think, earlier this month, which is looking at and showcasing some of the best organizations, global organizations in the world that embraced DE&I, we see that actually these are some of the big names, and the performance, they show how their performance has improved by having diversity, equity, and inclusion embedded into what they do. But very simply, what does that mean? Well, in our own experience, what we've seen with the questionnaires and the survey that we did amongst our members, which was actually, the response rate was very high, is that organizations and companies are at different levels in the spectrum. It is not surprising, because you either feel like they further the spectrum. But what I think it's important is we look at how do we move and be.
I think we're having some.
DE&I works when we have it as a strategy. That means that I'm sorry, I think it's a bit unstable. DE&I works when we have it as a strategic imperative of the board and of the management, and the KPIs are those that are shared with the executives. Oftentimes, organizations, for example, have DE&I initiatives. And unless they come from a strategic perspective, very often they may not be successful. So it's important that as organizations here, we are interested in DE&I, that we look at it right from the board level, executive level, into the KPIs. I think lastly, what I would like to share with you is also looking at what exactly at deconstructing DE&I. There's so many elements of DE&I that it's up to the organization to be clear about what it is that they are doing. I know that we're talking a lot here about gender and about women, but women are, of course, certainly not homogenous. There's a diversity. So when you're looking at women, we have to look at issues of intersectionality. That is, what are those groups, minorities, that have not just the qualities of being a woman, but there are other barriers in the workforce. So, for example, we know that if, for example, you are a minority, an ethnic minority, for example, if, for example, sexual orientation, disability, those give added barriers for women's progress. So we need to be clear about what it is we're talking about, whether it's gender, whether it is other elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and make sure that we're clear about this. Because when we have clarity, then we know exactly what it is we're doing. If not, it becomes very convoluted to address all the elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would leave it as that and just really talk about DE&I as being strategy. We talk about the CEO being the Chief Diversity Officer of the organization, the D&I department or the head must be resourced in order for them to be able to do what they need to do. And lastly, it's about inclusion, which means the behaviors that allow us to take and tap into the talent, the diverse talent that we have.
Thank you, Anino. And again, what a flexibility coming from a flight from Davos and sitting in your car talking to us. Really much appreciated, and we talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Safe travel back. I think it's super interesting what she did say, and I did want to tell you, we've been working with Dr. Anino Mihwa now for 1 year with the initiative, with 55 companies. And actually, we had a starting point to understand where they are. We also have those results. We saw the gaps. And actually, we see where some companies are leading the way. We're kind of sharing the best practices. But the one thing I've learned, one size doesn't fit all. And it actually, depending where you are in the world, where you are in the value chain, what kind of capacity you have, there are some of the solutions. But we'll definitely be reporting back this year in our stakeholder report on some of the results, some of the gaps we see, but also especially some of the collaborations that we're now building to lead that D&I agenda further in the industry. Talking about the women empowerment principles, Mihwa, I think it's always good to look at a champion implementing the women empowerment principles. So Alice, I think very briefly, you have signed the WEPs already a couple of years ago. You've been actually championing it in your organization. Can you give 3 concrete examples how the WEPs have made positive impact in your company?
Okay, thank you. I will be brief. We signed the WEPs in 2020, actually, and the year before we signed also the OECD statement on gender-responsive procurement. So at the time we were starting to look for concrete initiative that could help us shaping our journey. Because at the end, maybe the fact that we are a woman-founded precious metal refinery, which is very unusual in the sector, helped in the vision, because our CEO and president of the board, Ivana Ciabatti, has always been leading the way in terms of women empowerment in this sector. And at the time, we found the first point that was very useful for us, women empowerment principle, is that it can help you to give a better shape to your strategy, because like many other companies, we were having many initiatives, but it was difficult maybe to present it externally and to give it like a roadmap more like precisely. So first of all, in terms of governance, was very useful because it is a tool and it is concrete. That's what we liked, because usually you have standard stuff, but they don't tell you exactly what to do. So they gave you examples. And so the first point is giving shape to a strategy. The second point was also a good tool to support our stakeholders, to help, because we could share with our stakeholders the same tools so that they could start to implement that too. And the third point, which Emilie will talk later, is of course also giving more shape also on the supply chain, because in 2019, as I said, we signed the OECD statement on commitment to create a gender-responsive know your customer in the supply chain. And recently we did work together with WEP and W&JI initiative together in this gender-responsive procurement tool. And it was even better because we are giving a more precise shape to this strategy, which then can be shared throughout the supply chain.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for those of you that do not know the Women Empowerment Principles Tools of UN Women, it is online. It's so easy to access, and actually if you do the on-site, I would call survey, assessment, you will actually know where your gaps are, and it gives you recommendations. So, and there are lots of good case studies on there. Emilie, you've been, I would call, a rock star on leading this project with UN Women for almost a year now. We actually attracted 10 brands to join in on gender-responsive procurement. And I must say, I was there at the first meeting, and you were there in New York with UN Women, and there was actually not much excitement at first to disclose. And it was generic. Everyone in the room was a little bit worried, oh, it's my value chain, it's my supply chain. Do I actually know who am I buying from? And do I want to give that data available? I think we did a great model working directly with you. We have the results now, we have the gaps. I think, Emilie, it'd be great to kind of give you your perspective on how it was to lead this project.
Thank you, Iris. And you know, I don't want to repeat a lot of what has already been said. Obviously, the WEPs is a core part of our Pillar 3. We tackle a lot of topics under fostering inclusiveness, but WEPs is fundamental to what we do and what we encourage our members to do. And so, yeah, like we said, last year we initiated a pilot to essentially collaborate with UN Women, the WEPs team, to essentially support 10 companies, you know, from big ones like Cartier and Swarovski to smaller midstream players, Rosy Blue, Demexen, Ital Preziosi, to encourage them to take this tool and understand where are their gaps and challenges on the topic of gender-responsive procurement. And as we kind of initiated these different working sessions, I would say there was a bit of resistance in the beginning. They were quite hesitant to share, but as the sessions went on, they increasingly became more and more transparent and acknowledged that gender-responsive procurement is not a topic that they're currently tackling, but it's one that they want to. It's on their radar, but they're struggling to move forward. So it was also one of the first times that we applied this gender-responsive procurement assessment tool in an industry-specific context, which I think is essential because the recommendations provided by the WEPs team were industry-specific and completely relevant for the companies we were working with. So maybe delving a little bit into the key findings, like I said, gender-responsive procurement is new for most of them. Whether they were big companies or small, this is a topic that they haven't fully tackled before. Although they're very advanced on the topic of gender equality, this is a new movement that they want to gain momentum in. And some of the key recommendations that the WEPs team provided throughout was, one, you know, it sounds very simple, but one, having the policies and processes in place. Start with developing a standalone policy on gender-responsive procurement. Provide training to your team so they understand what gender-responsive procurement is, what it means for them internally, but also what it means externally to their suppliers. Collect data. That's always critical. Understand your supply chain, understand your suppliers, understand what they're doing on this topic and how you can support them move the topic forward. And then lastly, embedded into job roles. Gender-responsive procurement is not tackled a lot internally, but if you can attribute this topic to specific job descriptions, specific job roles, it'll really help move the needle forward. So maybe just to close that, you know, it was a really exciting pilot that we did. We shared these findings in a case study that we launched last September at the UN General Assembly. And we're now engaging with the UN Women team on a second phase where we can not only support these companies to implement these practices, but to also start understanding how they can engage with their suppliers on this topic. So.
Thank you, Emilie. And indeed, we're very excited to go ahead and soon much more news to come for our bigger vision for the industry. Lisa, I would say that you're like this diamond in the industry, right? You're like this fundament of the house, a pioneer, an activist also on many different topics. But I thought it'd be nice, you know, because you kind of heard some of the discussion, to give also a brief takeaway, you know, what you've learned or what you believe is important for people that are listening in to take away on this topic.
First of all, thank you very much. May I backstep, however, because you provided a brief in the outline, and there are a couple of points that I'd like to make, if I may, and that they're the following. And I guess this one I hadn't planned on saying, but you know, one of the things that happens in any community is that you develop a shorthand, and the shorthand then becomes codified into a system of acronyms. So we have WEPs, we have DEI, we have ESGs. All of these things are useful, but let's step back and ask, one, what do they mean? And even when we speak about the industry, what does that mean? Who is part of the industry? Because are we talking about people, entities that design and manufacture jewelry? Or are we including in our conception of, if you want to call it an industry, the jewelry industry, actually the sources of the materials that we then use in the objects that we create? And I would argue that that to have a really comprehensive perspective on the jewelry industry and also to dig deep into some of the issues that you have raised. Thinking about the fact that gold is mined, stones are mined, and so already right there you have in situ very different circumstances depending on not only what is the substance, but what is the size and scale of the entity where the extraction, if you will, is happening. Also, you have these entities that exist in different countries. So to put us into a global context, there is climate change, and climate change impacts gender roles because if, for example, a particular sector is wiped out, the women involved or not, are deeply impacted, as are children. The question of then other pursuits, are they free to learn? Are they free to have an education? Because we face a global system where there are repressive contexts, and you know, some of them are closer to home than we think, where what we really have to do, one of the challenges, not that everything that has been laid out is not, but is to create a circumstance where people are free to actually pursue learning that gives them the mobility that even permits them to contemplate the mobility that we're talking about. I also want to talk about the issue of childbirth, which is, may seem like it has nothing to do with any of this, except that humans with female reproductive organs bear children. Children are, in fact, the future because we need to keep going as a human race. In any context, women and the link to childbirth is challenging. One, the miracle of childbirth is also related to responsibility for another human, their needs, and that is one set, creates a whole set of things you have to meet, making sure that they can eat, for example. In one of Christian Amanpour's commercials, she asks a woman, how many meals a day, the woman is holding a child, how many meals a day can you eat? How many meals a day can you eat? Let's think about that as a question. So then we go on to the question of education. Is the mother free to learn? How can the access to education then be provided for the child? And then if we go into the what I'm going to call more conventional, but with no disrespect intended, it's just that I'm taking us from a mining scene to a corporate context, be it small or mid-sized. Fact is, we all know that in people's minds, the reproductive cycle creates preconceptions in people's minds. Will they stay? Are they capable? Questions like that. And these things may not even be articulated, but they are deeply ingrained in our expectations about what women can do. So what I'm trying to do here is to put all of this, to take some larger contextual issues and apply them to the question. And I'd like to then move on to two more positive points.
We need to be conscious of time, Lisa, so
Okay.
please keep
One
it crisp.
is artisanal labor,
Yeah.
and the fact that in certain economic sectors, we are highly conscious of what is often seen as domestic skill, if you will, as something that can become an engine for economic activity. More of this in the jewelry sector is required. And finally, and probably my most positive thing, which is this: much of the product that is produced in the jewelry sector is created for women. The fact is that that gives women an extraordinary amount of power. Let's use that power, not only in the marketplace, in the ways that we have thought about, but in the same way that we have linked purchasing to causes such as being aware of mining conditions in another part of the world, being aware of water supply. Let's also link it to issues of gender and apply the power that we have to amplify our voices, not only in a context such as this, which I'm honored to speak at, but in the marketplace at large. And I'm sorry I overstepped.
No, it's fine. And I always love your sharp thoughts and your bigger view. And allow me just to step in here, because I think, and that's been the great collaboration also with UN Women and some other partners that we're at the table now with for the next steps, is that we do understand, of course it depends from mining to retail, it depends on the materials, it depends on the regions. I like your example, what you say about the interconnectivity with climate. Nature, if we think about colored gemstones, you know, maybe from Madagascar, an enormous biodiversity hotspot, but then what are the labor practices there? You know, issues like child labor, and we know all these topics come back on the plate for some of these, from some of these materials, even if we don't want to talk about that. I think what we see is absolutely the need of the understanding of landscaping, understanding about the value chain where people are, and then looking and working with experts. And that's why I'm very grateful, because we get a lot of support from Kering and Cartier and also Chanel on this, because we want to push and understand better the issues and work with the industry. And the next pilot will be open, voluntary for other people of the industry to join, because we believe only together those learnings will bring new materials. And I think it's also very important for the audience to know that anything that we produce will go open source for the industry. Just to wrap up, and I think it's important, 2024, we heard it also in Davos, rebuilding trust. Trust is at the heart of our industry because we're about emotional currency. What are some aspirations that you think are key for our industry? And I'll start with you, Mihwa.
Thank you, Iris, and thank you for other panelists. So I actually forgot to mention two other pillars of the WEPs, and I will combine it because it's actually related with the aspiration. So one of the key pillars that I forgot was community. Company needs a lot to do to help women and the gender equality in the community, but last pillar is measurement. So actually aspiration, we want more companies to measure their progress and report publicly. As we've been saying, there are many standards developed and many new indicators. And if you don't have gender equality indicators, the WEPs provide over 70 indicators that you could use as your target in your workplace, marketplace, and community to assess where are you standing when it comes to workplace? How are your marketplace policies? How is your community policy? So that you can track and you can report. And I like to use this example. Some company came up to us and asked, we don't have anything to report. We have 0 women in board, we have 0 women in senior management. Even so, you have to report so that someday those 0, 0, 0s would get noticed from your top management and they'll say, what is wrong here? We got to do something about it. So our aspiration for 2024 for your industry, but also in other WEPs industry, that's over 9,000 signatories from 163 countries, we want them to report more. And we welcome you to be part of the WEPs and start reporting on your progresses. I mean, and then you actually have to do something, right, to report. So do something and then report. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think we are very advanced with our reporting framework, you know, that we're now launching this year. Very aligned with your work and with evolving regulations. You're doing a lot. What's next?
So for me, I would say representing Ital Preziosi, there would be 2 points. First, the CEO commitment, the higher, the governance representative commitment, because it has happened many times that you hear, I signed the WEPs because my customer wanted me to. So first of all, believing in the mission, and that will make it easy for then, like, your workforce to believe on that. And secondly, the supply chain transparency. We started to track how many women are in our supply chains in 2020, and we are reporting it transparently online since 2021 on our sustainability report. And for us, at the beginning, of course, was a progress because we are asking it when we onboard counterparts, we ask how many women work there, if there are policy, and since a few years ago, we started to ask even how many women there are like at the senior level, mid level, and whatsoever. So we are taking aggregated data, and there are counterparts answering that. Sometimes they don't answer the first time. We have to request it again. And so it's difficult to make up the mind of, their counterparts, but slowly asking, you're actually helping them to start tracking, because if they have to send you this number, they're actually starting to measure it. So what we are trying to do, and what we hope we will be support more on the procurement tools and other association that we are part, that we will be working more on this, is like more transparency on the supply chain. We are doing it, so it's not impossible. So, and to finish, we are also in the middle of the supply chain. As a refinery is also a little bit more complicated, but we track all of our counterparts, which is if it is mining, if it is not mining, and it is a recycled material, everything needs to be tracked, and it is possible to be tracked. So nothing is impossible in this sense.
Lisa, Art Initiative.
What I would say is there are two ways that we can look. One is we look inward, and that's extremely important because that's where vigilance and tracking and a certain kind of accountability comes from. And all of my colleagues here on this panel have spoken to those issues. And at the same time, I would like to say, look outward. And this is where I would like to say thank you to Iris and thank you to Gaetano for having included me on this panel. Because one of the things that I always hope to do is to encourage people to see interconnections amongst things that perhaps, because we look down, we are not necessarily looking up. And as Emerson tells us, if we look up, we see the immutable, the stars, the dark sky, and what does that lead us to? Sort of seeing interconnection. The stars become constellations. And we see, for example, connections between such things as gender and climate. And I could go on, but I think that one expression is a good lead-in to the next panel, which is a discussion of such. So that's one of, I guess, my takeaways, which is both look in and look out.
Emilie, this has been a little bit your baby, huh?
It has. I'll keep it short and sweet. I think looking forward to 2024, one of the things I've observed in the few years that I've been working on the topic of gender equality is that I think we need to make a shift from working on gender equality in silo and start thinking bigger. Start working on diversity, equity, inclusion as a bigger topic, as a broader topic, instead of gender equality alone. And I'm very excited for 2024 because I know at the initiative we're going to be making that shift, moving from gender equality to equality for all. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think it's also very important as an initiative that we are here to work with the wider ecosystem. We have a very good collaboration with Cibjo, of course, who has been a great supporter, but also BGOP in France. Sakila, I see you sitting here from the LBMA. I congratulate you, by the way, with your deputy CEO. That's what we need, you know, women to be empowered at the top. I saw that Melanie Grant was here. Again, at the top, it's important that we have women leading the industry forward. But then we need people like John Milligan, right? And Philip Olden, because these men support us. So I think it's really shifting that discussion and bring it to the next level. I think one thing that needs to be very sure when people ask about the Watch and Drew Initiative 2030, we are not a standards body. We are not here to compete with a standards body, but we are here to make a real difference. We are already making, I think, a huge impact through the coalition that we've joined. But we also want to be humble because behind the scene is so much work happening with experts, and Mihwa, you know that, because what we want to deliver to the industry needs to be quality, and we want the industry to be able to build on that and do even better things with the work we do. So I think that's also a bit the philosophy. So I think as a final comment, I just wanted to say 2030 is just around the corner. We heard it from Ed this morning. It is around the corner. our industry is an industry of emotions. It's about trust and integrity. It's about leaving no one behind. And I think for an industry that is so much about beauty and emotions, we have a double responsibility to care. So this is my call for action, that each one of us not only thinks about how they're going to act on D&I, but actually starts the journey and comes back to us. Thank you very much for joining us today.